The Chitrik Academy is dedicated in loving memory of Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chitrik.
Welcome to today's lesson. In honor of Purim, we'd like to wish all our fans out there a happy Purim, a Purim Sameach, and welcome to today's lesson. Today's lesson, we are going to be discussing a little bit about the history of Purim. We know that a lot happened in the 70 years between when the Beis Hamikdash, the first temple, the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and the story of Purim. This is what we are going to discuss today. And it all begins with a prophecy. Yirmiyah was a prophet during that time, and he said a few prophecies that plays a very important role in our story. And the prophecies are as follows. The first one is actually two psukim in Perek Chafei, the 25th chapter of Yirmiyahu. And he says as follows. V'hoisa kol ha'aretz hazeis l'charva l'shama. First he says that the land of Israel, this entire land, shall be in ruin. V'avdu ha'goyim ha'ela es melech Bavel shivim shana. And these nations, which refers to the Jewish nation, will serve the king of Bavel, the king of Babylonia, for 70 years. So it speaks about in this pasuk that the Jews will go in exile for 70 years. Then it continues, and Hashem has a message. Yirmiyah has a message for the king of Bavel. And he says, V'haya kim lois shivim shana, and it will be that when these 70 years are complete, Efkoid al melech Bavel, I will take an account the king of Bavel, Balagoyahu, and for that nation, the nation of Babylonia, Ne'um Hashem esavainam, I will take an account for I am Hashem, their sin, Veseretz Kashtim, and for the land of Kashtim, V'samti Oisai V'shimus Elam, and I will make them destroyed. I will destroy them forever. V'samti Oisai V'shimus Elam. So the first pasuk over here, it's a message telling the Jewish people that you will go down to exile for 70 years. The 70 years is very important to our story. And then he tells the king of Bavel, I'm warning you. Yirmiyahu is warning the king of Bavel, in the name of Hashem, that after 70 years, they will be judged. This is the first part of the prophecy. Then we go now to Perek Chavtes, which is 4 prakim later, in Pasuk Yud, and Hashem says another thing. Besides for this that I will judge the king of Bavel, I also return the Jewish people to their land. Kikoi Amar Hashem, because so has Hashem said. Ki lefi milois lebavel shivim shana, that after the 70 years in Bavel have been completed, Efkoid eschem, I will attend to you. V'akimoisi aleichem es dvarei hatoiv, and I will fulfill the good words that I've told you. V'hashiv eschem el makom hazeh, to return you to this land. So here we see in the third pasuk, the first pasuk speaks about the Jewish people going to exile, to Galus. The second pasuk speaks about how Hashem will punish the Bavel and the nations that have sought to destroy the Jewish people. And pasuk 3, Hashem says that I will return the Jewish people to my land. Now these psukim, and specifically where it speaks about the 70 years, is what is the basis of the shir, which we will be discussing now. Because a lot happened in history between when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed until the story of Purim, that all revolve around this idea of 70 years. So the question everyone had was, when do these 70 years begin? Now, it wasn't only the Jewish people who were trying to know when the 70 years was over so they could go back to Eretz Yisrael. It was the non-Jews as well, because the non-Jews were also warned that they're going to be punished. So they were all very worried and very afraid what would happen. So, 70 years. no one knew when these 70 years are counted from. Because in the year 3319, this is of the Jewish calendar, the year 3319 was the year that Nebuchadnezzar defeated King Yehoiakim, who he was the king of the Jewish people at that time. And that's when he was defeated. So do we count the 70 years from then or not? The prophecy we just mentioned was said 2 years later in 3321. Is it 70 years from the prophecy or 70 years from when the Jewish country was captured, was conquered? Or how about 6 years later? In 3327 was actually the first major exile with King Yehoiakim. Up until this time, for these 8 years, Nebuchadnezzar actually ruled over Eretz Yisrael. However, he put a puppet king, he put a Jewish king in charge of the Jewish nation. However, it was really under control of Nebuchadnezzar. It was in the 3327, it was 8 years after he conquered Eretz Yisrael, that he decided that he's going to exile the Jewish people with their king Yehoiakim. So the question is, does the 70 years begin then or not? Then, 11 years later, was the actual Churban, the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. So maybe we should count the 70 years from then. No one knew what the 70 years that Yirmiyahu referred to when it began. These 70 years, when do we start counting? That's what we're going to discuss in this class, a little history as to what all the history of the events that led up to Purim. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar, we just mentioned, was the king of Bavel. He was the Babylonian king who conquered over the Jewish nation and exiled the Jewish people and destroyed the first Beis Hamikdash. Well, he died in the year 3383. After Nebuchadnezzar died, there's a king. The king who took over, his name is Belshazzar. He was the next king of Bavel. Now, that was in 3383. 6 years later, in 3389, his advisors told him that, it's been 70 years since Nebuchadnezzar actually defeated the Jewish nation, and we see that Hashem has still not redeemed the Jewish people, so it seems like you're safe. It seems like Hashem has forgotten the Jewish people, and he will not redeem them. So in honor of this, Belshazzar decided to make a party, to make a feast. During that feast is a famous story that's recorded in Daniel, that he decided to use some of the kelim, some of the vessels from the Beis Hamikdash, and a hand appeared out of nowhere and started writing on the wall. And it was written the words were Aramaic, but it was written in Hebrew lettering. And so he called Daniel, and Daniel said that it means that your kingdom is going to be destroyed and taken away from you. Now that night, Daryavish, who's also known as Darius, who's from Madai, the country of Madai, so he took over, he killed Belshazzar, and he took over the Babylonian kingdom. Some say that he actually saw Vashti, decided to take her as a wife for his grandson, Achashverosh, and the wedding happened, one of the reasons why he made a feast in the Megillah was for his marriage, his wedding between Achashverosh and Vashti. Okay, so now, this is the first 70 years, which the 70 years, the Jews weren't redeemed yet, so the 70 years did not begin from here. However, Bavel was destroyed after 70 years from Nebuchadnezzar, when Nebuchadnezzar defeated King Yehoiakim. So this was the first counting of 70 years. This was counting number 1, which was not what the Navi meant, because we were not brought back to Eretz Yisrael. Then what happened later on is that in 3390, 1 year later, Darius had died, and Kodesh was Dariyavish's son-in-law, and Kodesh took over the kingdom. Now 1 year later, he got nervous. He saw that 1 year later in 3391, it's 70 years from the first prophecy from Yirmiyahu. So he didn't want to be punished by Hashem. So he decided, he and his advisors decided that, you know what? We're going to tell the Jewish people that they can rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. And in honor of rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash, he hoped that no harm would befall him. And at this point, the Beis HaMikdash started to be rebuilt. This is in the year 3391, 70 years after the first prophecy from Yirmiyahu. Now, one year later, Dayavish had died, and the year 3392, so right closer to over here, year 3392, Achashverosh took over. Some say Achashverosh is Kedish's son, others say that he was not from royal blood, from a royal family. We're going to leave that discussion for now. So Achashverosh took over in 3392, and 3 years later, in his third year of kingdom, his advisors told him that it's around 70 years later from the first exile that Nebuchadnezzar exiled the Jewish people with the king Nehemiah, because it was the beginning of the year 3327, and it's already maybe close to the end of the year 3395. So they said you have around 70 years over here, and we see that Hashem has forsaken the Jewish nation. So Achashverosh said, okay, in that case, we could stop building the Beis HaMikdash. Instead of rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash like Kodesh had given the permission to, we will stop rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. And he made a feast to celebrate that he has no longer anything to worry about, because it's 70 years, and obviously Hashem has not forgiven the Jewish people, and he will never return them. This is one of the reasons why Mordechai told the Jewish people that they should not go to this feast, because it's a feast celebrating how the Jewish people are in Golus. Then Vashti was killed during this time. In the year 3399, Esther became the new queen. In the year 3400 was Esther had a child. His name was Dayavish II. And the year 3404 was the story of Purim. So let's put that around over here. The year 3404 actually was the story of Purim. So put this down over here. The Purim story happened around this time. So there was the story of Purim, and we have the Ness of Purim. Haman and Achashverosh actually made their decree in the year 3403. A year later is when the whole miracle of Purim happened, and it was V'nehapachu, and how all the Jews were able to destroy their enemies. Achashverosh died 2 years later in the year 3406. Achashverosh died. And 2 years later, his 8-year-old child, because we said Dayavish, the second, Esther's son, was born in the year 3400. So in the year 3408, exactly 70 years from the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash, this 8-year-old king, who was very brilliant, he gave permission to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. That's when Ezra went up to build the second Beis HaMikdash. So we see that the entire history of all from the first time, from the first Beis HaMikdash, from when King Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Jewish kingdom, all the way until after Purim, is all connected with one concept, trying to figure out when is the 70 years. At the end, the 70 years was from the Churban, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. 3338 plus 70 years was exactly 3408, and that's when Hashem returned the Jewish people and rebuilt the Beis HaMikdash. Have a happy Purim.